My tongue is coming out. Anyway, I ate a lot in my previous life.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the March SLTI Livecast, and today we're going to be talking about real world learning, what it is, how to do it and why it's important. So with that in mind, we've got some experts in because I don't really know. I'm supposed to be writing a chapter about it. I'm still figuring out what it is. So we have a couple of experts on the most recent research to come and talk to us. We'll be taking the academic perspective from a few of our lecturers here, and then we'll be finding out about the impact of real world learning and those kind of teaching practices on employability for students. So first of all, very happy to welcome Dawn Morley and Hamid Jamil,
Nice to be here.
who are both researchers in SLTI, and you are looking at real world learning at the moment.
We are.
So what is real world learning?
Well, I think that's the difficulty because that's what we're trying to find out. So Jamil and I have just have a book publication, which is we've just signed for, and we're also doing research at the same time. So what struck us was that there's an increased sort of emphasis on employability and work readiness for students, and we sense that that's changing the approach or ethos to learning, particularly here at Solent. And so we decided to write a book and do some research on it.
Excellent. All right.
Just one thing to add, and we do not claim that it's entirely a very new concept, because many universities, they are putting these terms like in their larger curriculum agenda. And we have conducted 3 CPDs, and we have found that there are practices around different disciplines of real world learning, like lecturers are doing projects, students are going outside, they're presenting their ideas in conferences. So we also think that our book will also evidence some real world practices available in the universities.
I think two of the difficulties we found is that, as Jamil said, it's a word that's used a lot. There doesn't seem to be any sort of theoretical basis to it. And in primary and secondary education, it's being used to sort of almost increase the self-esteem of students.
Okay.
And I think it's part of it, and having placements and having projects in courses. But I think we're discovering it's actually a different way of looking at higher education, which is much more outward facing. So it goes beyond university to the world of work afterwards.
Okay, so is this something that is creeping up from primary school that is starting to gain traction in the later levels?
There are some similarities there, because as we are saying about the application of learning, how the learning can be applied. And in primary school, students actually, they go visit places to see the real world scenario there. But here we are more talking about how to apply the learning to the future employment and profession. So it is very much target oriented, and you know, higher education is very much like target oriented, discipline focused. There are disciplinary divides over there. So we also need to think about how different disciplines, they can cater the need of students in terms of their employability. So it is more focused compared to primary and secondary education.
And I think also when students, for instance, go on placement, you see this sort of increased motivation, maturity, where students are genuinely really engaged and immersed in their learning. And we're hoping that some of that excitement can actually come back into universities and be part of the learning and teaching here.
You mentioned the disciplines, so real world learning isn't a blanket thing, it is something that might vary by discipline. In terms of how you approach it?
Partially, because the universities, they are like the promoters of like discipline focused education, but nowadays they are also advocating in favor of multidisciplinary approaches where students will also have skills of other disciplines. Otherwise you can transfer your knowledge to different places. In that actually sense, we can also say that the real world learning will give a chance to them to understand how the different disciplines work, how the knowledge is defined in different disciplines. And so it will also enhance their employability, because if you think of like if a student studies journalism, so he may be a journalist, but he can also be a good writer. Like he can just report things in a very nice and a very fashioned way. And so the options, I think they get more like when they think about the real world and the applicability of their learning. So this is also one of the aims of real world learning, that to orient students with different applications of their learning, not only that particular discipline, but in other disciplines as well.
And for the book, we're actually calling it Applied Pedagogies. So it's where the learning and teaching is very much focused, not only in the immediate learning, but what goes beyond university as well. And so students have the skills and motivation and persona to sort of make it in the workplace and in further education, if that's what they choose to do.
Can I just add one thing? One of the key features of our book is each and every chapter is written by multiple authors. And our aim was to integrate different disciplinary approaches within one chapter. And each and every chapter has multiple case studies there, and the case studies are taken from different disciplines. So it's a cross-disciplinary approach to see a particular educational theme.
So what you say about applied pedagogies, what other kinds of specific chapter areas are there? Because I'm writing about innovative pedagogies. Well, I will be writing about innovative pedagogies very soon. But what else will you cover? How do you break it down?
Well, we've broken it down into three sections. Our own examples are I'm working with two colleagues from media, and we're looking very much at the placement experience. But the placement experience across different disciplines, and how students can learn from those experiences and grow themselves professionally. And Jamil's a very different
My one is about internationalization of curricula, and that will obviously include inclusion and diversity aspects, because university, it accommodates students from different backgrounds, from different geographic locations. So how we can reach those students. The universities are very keen on doing this thing, and they have been doing this for a long time. But in terms of employability, in terms of placement, how we can address these issues. So in my chapter, I'll do that. I think we also have like a civic engagement aspect in one chapter, and another chapter, it also talks about project as a means for real world learning. And we also have the policy chapters, the higher education management ethos, so how the university can see real world learning as a constructive curriculum for the change of students and to address contemporary educational needs.
And I think what we're doing in the book is arguing that if you're going to take a real world learning approach, it's not just top down or bottom up. Everybody has to do it. It has to be an ethos. But clearly we're only at the beginning of the research, so we don't want to preempt what we're going to discover. But with every group of authors who are doing chapters, we're getting together with them before the writing begins and concept mapping their views of real-world learning, and then those findings will be in the introduction and the conclusion of the book as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of doing it, because all of your authors might come up with a totally different concept map of what they understand real-world learning to be.
Yes.
Are you going to try and bring those together, or are you just going to say, here it all is?
Well, I think it will inform the second piece of research we want to do, which, as Jamil was saying, is more discipline based, and we're going into 9 local universities and comparing real world learning in different disciplines. Yes, we don't want to run before we can walk, so we don't know. I mean, everybody's using the term, but what actually is it? And if we accumulate some really good ideas, then perhaps everybody can do it in a better and more focused way.
Is it possible to say what it isn't?
It isn't.
Yeah, just occurred to me. Maybe not.
Well,
That was a curveball.
I think it's very interactive. I think it could flatten any power structures between lecturer and student. I think it encourages students to be more autonomous, accept more responsibility. This is, of course, if it works.
Yeah.
One thing that I can tell that it is not very much controlled, the learning is, because if you see traditional, very much lecturer based, lecturer centered, and sometimes teaching focused, but it would be entirely student centered, because they will define their needs and they will also define the process. Because defining process is very important. How they want to learn, this is very important, and that needs to be aligned with the real world situations. So it is not very much controlled, rather flexible and very creative, because student teacher, they can co-create the processes there as well.
So it sounds like it could be an agent of change itself, but also give students more agency in their own learning.
I think
And
so.
autonomy as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I think higher education has changed so much, but perhaps the way we teach and learn needs to catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, we very much rely on very established theories in higher education, and maybe it's time we re-looked at what we use, so it's up to date for modern students and what they need.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead.
Can I just try to link with one theory, because nowadays we are talking about research informed teaching. Now, this real world learning will enable that research informed teaching, but in a very open way, in a very outward facing way, where students will do research in which are connected to the practical workplace situations or their future study related. So they will gain the skills of research through research informed teaching, which they can apply even after their education. So basically it is not contradictory with research informed teaching, rather it is giving a good shape to research informed teaching.
I can see that. Have you encountered any resistance to it in your research at all?
Not yet, because we're probably too not really far in enough. I mean, I think there's in some universities they're quite anti a really strong employability link. I've come across that before, not at Solent but elsewhere. And I think it provides the sort of idea that universities are a world apart, and I just don't think that's helpful. Jamil talked about increasingly there's civic engagement and trying to encourage students to be involved in their local communities, and I think Solent in particular is very, very good at that. You know, there shouldn't be this divide between academia and the world outside.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it sounds like I should know what I'm writing about.
We'll all learn in time.
I mean, it's as you say, early days, isn't it? But it's trying to harness something that everyone's talking about and trying to give a bit of shape to it, and maybe pin it down for what it might mean at Solent and how we teach it.
Yes.
But perhaps we're doing a lot of these things already,
That's true.
but we're just not recognising
Exactly.
what we're doing.
Exactly.
Just put me in mind while you were talking, I think there's probably a blog post on it from a week or two ago about the living CV, where the learning outcomes are almost translated into CV language, and it's about recognising what you've learned and how it's useful, those transferable skills. So it sounds like this feeds into that. It's a part of that. It's understanding what you're learning.
Yes,
That's true.
and I think what a huge difficulty for students is actually recognising that everything they do is learning. It's not just sitting in a lecture theatre.
Yeah.
And then being able to use that as skills going forward. And the living CV example is a really good example of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that ongoing issue that if they're not being told something, they're not learning anything.
Exactly.
Even this is not about teaching and learning, this is also about the evaluation of learning, assessment of learning. Like I was having a talk with Roy before, that the way we assess the learning, do they comply with the way they will be assessed in their workplaces? So I think the learning will also, real world learning will also create an opportunity to just orient them with the real world assessment. And so they will also get an opportunity to be assessed in a very real world way, like business studies. Like there are some applied subjects which really need real world assessment procedures to be incorporated.
Cool. Well, thank you both very much. That's been really helpful, actually, in kind of setting the scene and giving a bit of context. So I really appreciate that, and
Thank
good
you.
luck with the book and making all your authors do what you need them to do,
Including you,
including
Karina.
me. Yes.
Thank you very
That's
much.
on camera now. It's official. So thanks very much. So next we're going to hear about the teaching and learning perspective and what assessment might look like by bringing in 3 of our marvellous lecturers. And thank you again, Dawn and Jamil. Thank you all. We have our traditional changeover of microphones. It's live TV. It's great. We're getting cosy. Yeah, Lindsay's not going to take up much room. All right, so who do we have? We have Rob Dalton and Lindsay Watt, who are from the PR and Communications degree, and Roy Hannay, you're the head of
Course leader.
Course leader. Sorry, I've got it written down right here. I was trying not to. Of media production.
Yeah.
So, real world learning. What is it in the classroom? How do you do it? Do you do it? Tell me what it's like for you. I'll leave it completely wide open. How do you want to start?
Big question, isn't it, really? And I guess it's something that means different things to different lecturers and different educators. For me, I guess it's about making sure that the students that we have here have real productive connections with the outside world. That they know what they're learning, that they know how to apply what they're learning. Maybe they know that as a consequence to what they're going to get into in their professional life.
So a taster for what their chosen profession might actually be like, whether they're suited or how well they're suited.
Indeed.
Yeah.
So a range of things, and obviously challenges as a consequence, making sure that those connections are real, worthwhile, productive, can take different shapes and different forms. And I guess our experiences are going to be different as a consequence.
Yeah, because I know you've just had a crisis simulation day, which sounds amazing. So
It's
what did that
really fun event.
involve?
So we run this every year mainly for the PR students, but we also have marketing students, criminology students and master's students across a range of disciplines attending. And they come in to apply the learning from the classroom about crisis management, issues management, all the different kind of aspects about how to communicate in those circumstances to a real world situation. So we come up with a scenario and the students have to respond to that ever-evolving scenario throughout the day, which kind of worsens and worsens until eventually it ends, and then they produce reflections on the day. And with the reflections, the important bit there is that they understand that the theory learned in the classroom relates to the application in the real world and what actually happens during a crisis in the real world. So they're really kind of getting the grounding for their future careers to think about how they might respond, what sort of communications might be required, what the tone and style of those might be, what works, what doesn't work. So they're practicing it in a relatively safe environment, but during the day it doesn't feel very safe, and they say it's quite stressful, it's quite full on, but it's a really good application of the theory.
Yeah, it sounds great, because what they're doing is they're experiencing that real life situation, but it's afterwards when they reflect on it, they're consolidating their learning, because they can look back and think, oh yeah, I did that thing, and maybe I should have done that instead. Or,
absolutely. So I spoke to some of the master's PR students after the event, and they said that learning the theory in the classroom is one thing, and they understand the concepts of the models and the processes that they should go through, but actually experiencing it in the real world situation is very different and quite stressful and quite time constrained. So actually applying that theory gave them a practical understanding of what might happen out in industry. And one of our alumni has recently been involved in a crisis situation at work where she couldn't leave the office for 48 hours because she had to just deal with the communications required. And actually, so this is what actually happens.
Yeah.
So they're really getting that hands-on experience.
And do you think they appreciate it at the time, that this is a real workplace type scenario?
I think they do. I did get comments like, could you not build a lunch break in? Can we not just stop for an hour? Because they do find it quite stressful and quite difficult, but that's the point.
Yeah.
That is what happens in the real world, and that's how they need to respond.
Can I also add, as teachers, the reflection section that is built into that day is also quite helpful to us. It's great for the students taking part, but it's good for us too, because we can learn from that experience. We know how to adjust it perhaps next time, or what to include or what not to include, what's going to work for them maybe on another occasion in the future. So it's good for us too to get that sort of feedback.
So you can work out how to increase the pressure next time.
Maybe.
Excellent. Yeah. What does real world learning look like for your subject area, Roy?
I think I agree with Rob. It's kind of many things to many people. It can be like anything from bringing in a speaker to having students out kind of making films for or doing work experience. So it's very difficult to pin it down and to say it's one thing or the other. I think for us, I teach media practice, and for us real world learning perhaps doesn't happen in the classroom. They're always doing projects, and in a way they are simulated kind of real world experiences, but they're never real world experience really. There's kind of a lot of stuff missing. They don't have budgets, for example. They don't have commissioning editors chasing them, or there's a lot that isn't going on in there. So to a certain extent, I think real world learning has to happen outside of the classroom, outside of the university, to have kind of value for them. There's all sorts of questions about where practice exists. And we do practice in the university. Is practice in the university the same as practice outside? And whether practice making a short film with no budget is the same as practice making a drama for Netflix. So there are all sorts of questions, and I think it's good to have a sense for staff teaching, to have a sense of contextualising everything you do in the real world and trying to place that in the real world. But ultimately the students will gain that transformative experience by going outside the university, not by working inside the university.
I guess it's probably also worth, I think, stressing that it needn't be a special event, it needn't be a special occasion, it needn't be a one-day campaign or a one-day simulation.
Yeah.
It actually could be something that you can integrate into the routine of teaching, with perhaps guest speakers or an expert on a particular topic coming in to talk to you, or working on real-world problems without necessarily the involvement of those people who were directly involved, but getting students to talk about what they would do in those instances. So you can start to build in this type of learning without necessarily making a fuss over it. Integrating it into the classroom can be actually very straightforward.
Yeah, so is it about just finding ways to contextualise the classroom learning from that professional viewpoint? Because I'm guessing setting up a whole day, it's not a small task,
It's
is it?
not really. There's quite a lot of background work that goes into creating these events and creating these experiences for the students. But equally, we do things like working on live client briefs as well. So even for level 4 students on the PR degree, from the very beginning, they work with a live client to produce a PR plan and produce outputs from that plan specifically for them. So that's quite different from just learning the theory about what goes into a public relations planning exercise, and that is a really valuable exercise for them as well, because they're kind of learning client communication, they're learning the importance of working to that brief that's been provided to them, not going off on too many tangents, but also being creative and putting their ideas together for a real world client. So it's bringing that in right from the very beginning of the degree and then continuing that throughout the 3 years that they're studying with us.
If I could pick up on that, we do a lot of live client stuff, and we work with Solent Creatives who bring clients in, and I'm a big fan. I think it's really important. And there's the thing that's missing from that equation is you get the client and you get the client experience, but they're not socialised into that practice. If you go and work for a company that is doing live briefs or briefs for real clients, you don't go in there as the head of production or the director or the main person. You go in there as a junior and you learn through being socialised into a community of practice. And for me, as I say, I'm a big fan of live briefs, but there's a problem there, is that they're only getting a partial experience, and that the important bit is lacking, which is that socialisation. And I'm still struggling to think about how you can build that socialisation in without a huge amount of resources, without building a whole company in order to get them to work for them.
I guess what it does do, though, as you've sort of very eloquently described, is show the importance of that. It shows that if that's missing, maybe the project won't be as successful as perhaps you'd anticipated it being. So the idea of culture as part of, or knowing how a business thinks or a particular company thinks, can be taught through absence as opposed to inclusion. You can get students talking about it.
I think, you can, if you get students talking about it, but I think that the problem is that they don't necessarily see it lacking. Whereas you, I and others might see it as kind of, well, there's something missing here. They don't necessarily, because they haven't yet always been in that experience to see that community of practice operating.
And of course, working in a business, I guess, which has many freelancers and one-man bands or one-woman bands, this type of problem is going to be found quite often, isn't it?
Well, where are the practitioners and where are the community of practice? The media is kind of built around project networks, which are diffuse, shifting, dynamic, and they're like mushrooms. They spring up and then disappear again the next day. So, finding out where they are and engaging with them can be quite difficult. And also, they're not. Those kind of communities of practice are very testing in terms of who they will allow in. And so, it's not like you can just phone up and say, can I come along to your film shoot? You need to spend a long time developing the relationship in order to be invited onto that set. So it's quite challenging finding those communities of practice and building that in. But I think it's, as we go forward, as we think about real world learning, if we want to really kind of create an authentic real world learning, that we have to address that communities of practice issue.
We need to be critical, don't we? I mean, if we're talking about the problems of real world learning, there's lots of potential and lots of opportunities, but if we're talking about the problems, I think you're touching on a key one, in that business may not always be the right place to learn that message, or indeed what business wants may not be right for the student in that context at that time.
How would you go about marrying those two up?
Well, making sure, I think you need to be critical, don't you? You need to be reflective of it. And as you were talking, you need to say, well, what worked well there? What didn't work? Where are people going to get that idea or an answer to that problem from? And sometimes that means thinking about a combination of teaching methods, not simply relying on quotes real world learning or authentic learning. It's about saying, where can that contribute? How can I integrate that? And what's left? What else do I need to do? And what's the best way of dealing with that particular problem? It might well actually be the traditional classroom.
Yeah.
I think I look at Solent Creatives and I look at that and I see it's not a full community of practice, but they have staff there who are experienced, who are involved, who are engaging in mentoring with the students. They have students who've been doing lots of projects for them, who are more experienced, who are taking out more junior students, and I see that as really, really positive. And you can see that in some of the other enterprise centres in the university. The difficulty there is, on our programme we have, 200-300 students, and to get all of those 200 or 300 students through a really good Solent Creatives experience, you'd need a much bigger operation, wouldn't you? You'd need
You really would.
you'd need to be the BBC or someone like that.
Yeah.
And the students at level 4 are obviously experienced this real world learning with live client briefs in a very light touch context. But once they've been through some work experience, once they've gone out and actually experienced life in a PR agency or life in an in-house PR team, the next time that they take on a live client brief, they'll take the application of learning from that experience into the classroom live brief experience.
That development from level to
You
level?
definitely do see that growth. Between, say, level 4, the new undergraduates and the sort of experiences they bring with them, what we're then able to do and the sort of growth they can show between levels 5 and 6 can be quite astonishing.
Yeah, and that sort of takes into account that socialisation that you were talking about. Is once they've experienced that and been in the situation, they can then bring that back into university.
But we could do more of that. We could have more where level 6 students are working with level 5 and level 4. We could have much more of that. I think one of the constraints to that is the modularity, unitisation of the programs, and if we had kind of more flexibility to create sort of maybe mini enterprise kind of networks within the course groups that are the communities, then perhaps that might be a way forward. Because certainly I've got level 6 students who are taking level 4 students out, and there is that community of practice sort of mentoring going on.
No, I agree. We, in addition to the crisis simulation day, we also run a campaign in a day, which is across the business school. It takes in students from many different backgrounds and disciplines doing exactly the sort of thing you've just described. So again, another way in which you can integrate this into your teaching.
It's funny, at the beginning of our discussion I was thinking of real world learning as a tool in your pedagogic toolbox, but now I'm thinking maybe it's a different toolbox.
Well,
you can rethink so much if you had the will and the space and the resources. You could just say, let's do everything completely differently, or you could just say, I want to integrate this little bit of industry professional practice into this part of the course.
It's quite challenging for students. I've got students, first year students, who we're kind of gearing them up for this kind of real world learning experience, and I think I'm getting feedback that suggests we're doing it too well, because they're going, oh, this is a bit scary. And I'm thinking, well, on one hand that's a positive thing, but actually if it creates a barrier, then it's not.
It's pointless.
So there is a sense of, well, wake up and smell the coffee, but our role is to not just go, okay, you've got to feel the fear and do it anyway, is to kind of help them step in, make that, take that step.
It's challenging them in the right way, isn't it? So it's challenging them in small steps for them to be able to feel confident about going out into
that
industry.
Framework for them that they can, as you said earlier, it's a safe space for them to be scared in.
Yes.
But not so they're paralysed with fear.
But then is that an authentic real world learning space?
Yeah, that's the dilemma.
Because if you're in the world of work, then you do it or you don't.
We can be beguiled by these terms, can't we? And thinking that it means completely something at the polar opposite of what we're doing.
Yeah.
When in fact it isn't. It's an invitation to look at that experience, to say where can we use that? How can students benefit from that? It's not saying everything must be done the way business does. In fact, that would be very dangerous to do everything the way business does it.
Well, then we'd be a business.
Yeah, businesses fail
Absolutely,
too.
and that comes
True.
back to the reflective piece that you were talking about, that the students need to reflect on their experiences, but equally we do as well. We need to reflect on the experiences we're providing for the students and work out, is that the best way for them to learn?
Yeah, yeah. It sounds like it certainly does have potential to be a really good way for students to learn. Well, things that you're doing are already supporting students in their learning. But yeah, these issues and problems, I guess, is there a way of dealing with them head on, or do we have to take it on a case by case? Or how would you give advice to somebody that wanted to bring real world learning into their course but was put off by some of these problems?
Well,
I mean, just fix it now. Come on.
provide the answer to all the problems. No, I think it is about being reflective. It is about making judgments. It is about finding out what's out there, and not believing everything. Not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is an expression that always amuses my students for some reason. But not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, recognising that what traditional university life can offer the students, and integrating that with authentic learning, with real-world learning.
Yeah.
But making judgments and making decisions and applying what is sensible in the context of your own particular unit.
And kind of keeping up with what also happens in practice as well. So to help me with planning the crisis simulation day here, I went to attend a crisis simulation at NATS, which was a fantastic experience. And to see how they organise their crisis simulation day, I could then take the lessons learned from that and apply them here, so that the students are getting as authentic an experience as possible. So doing your own research before attempting to bring it into the classroom can be really helpful.
Good advice. Good advice.
Find opportunities to work with people who have a need to work with students, I guess. We do a project with Midhants Railway. We're quite lucky, they got quite a big lottery grant to renovate this particular steam train, and they had a need to work with students and they were struggling. I said, well, we can bring you lots of students, and this is the third year that we've taken
fantastic.
an entire year group up there, and they make films for them, and that's a kind of a fantastic experience, because they're actually going onto a real heritage railway. They're working with the all the volunteers there. Their work is actually all gets used. It all goes up onto their YouTube. They get an audience for it. There's a fantastic opportunity for them. And so I think part of it is finding those organisations that have a need that can actually address a large group of students is an important thing to try and do. But that's quite a big project. Maybe you don't want to do that when you first start playing with real world learning.
But it's opportunity, isn't it? Opportunity and
Yeah.
research and looking out for things that you could do. And I guess talking to people who are already doing it as well would be.
And selling the benefits to the clients, because
Yeah.
actually
Yeah.
they're getting some free work,
Yeah.
which is always a good thing for them.
Yes.
That is a
absolutely.
balance, though, isn't it? It is,
Yeah.
because students aren't a free good to business. You know, it's about making sure that they're there for a good reason.
And they're
to
actually
learn.
learning something. Yeah.
But it can be inspirational. You know, these settings can be inspirational for students to experience what you've just described, or to experience crisis simulation, which is sort of driven by experts in the field. It can be quite an inspiring moment for them.
Yeah.
One of the ways to sell it to clients and businesses is to say that basically this is an improved version of recruitment for them, because they actually get to meet a broad range of students.
Very
And
true.
actually, where I've seen this happen is that by the end of it, the client will know, I want to work with that student. And very often those students will find themselves doing work experience. I've even worked with a client in Chichester who just used to do live projects to recruit students. And it's a great way for you to
Yeah.
really get
To
to
see them
know
in action,
who
don't
you
you?
want to
Yeah.
work with. You know.
Yeah, that's very true. At level 5, our students work on a competition brief for a live client, and the prize is a 2-week internship at the organisation, which is a fantastic
Yeah.
opportunity for the student, but equally for the client to
Yeah.
choose their favourite student from the
Definitely.
group to work with them.
Sounds great. I'm conscious of time. I'd love to keep talking to you, but I think it would be rude. So thank you very, very much for your time. That's been really interesting to hear about what you've been doing, and also thought-provoking as well. So really appreciate
Thank you
that.
very
Thank
much.
you very
Cheers.
much. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye.
And we have our last bout of microphone ballet before our final guest. Ballet is dangerous. No harm done. Excellent. We're all very technical here. It's all under control.
Yeah, okay.
Well done. Thank you, Hannah. Excellent. All right. Caroline, thank you for coming. Really appreciate that.
Karina, it's nice to be here.
Yes, good. So you're the head of employability and student enterprise.
That is correct, that's my title.
That's a very nice title. So how does real world learning fit into that? I mean, how is this an important thing that we've been talking about here?
Oh, it's an essential thing. It's one thing to get your degree, that's really important.
Yep.
You learn the knowledge that you need. You very often, with a lot of our degrees, you learn the skills that you need. But it's about adding that extra layer in terms of applying all of that into a real life situation, but also learning the right behaviours, because very often you're working with a real client. So let's say it's a live brief like the guys have just discussed. Yeah. It's one thing if you're working on a brief for one of your academics and you do your best work and you'll approach it in a very academic way. But if you actually ultimately have to write a report that's going to be read by the client in the context of that business, maybe you present back to that client, it just ups your game, and it helps the students to appreciate what life is like outside of the classroom as much as it is inside the classroom.
So it's not just the skills, it's how you're conducting yourself.
Absolutely,
and
it's the
how you're relating
behaviours,
to people.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And employers tell us that they want work-ready graduates. So again, if students are able to do work placements or work with clients on particular projects, or as Roy was explaining through Solent Creatives, go out and work on client briefs, then that gives them that work readiness. So they learn how to behave in different situations. They'll learn things like how to communicate.
Yep.
So communicating, does the client want you to communicate through email? Does he want you to call him? Actually, does he not like you to call him too much? And it's best if you add it all up and just get back to him once rather than ring him an awful lot if you've got lots of queries. Or if you're in an office environment working on a placement, how does that particular office manage their communications? So you learn so much through those sorts of experiences. And I think the other key thing that you learn, which I think again that they've just hinted at really, it's about it's that different approach to something. It's about that critical thinking, that problem solving, that creative problem solving. So, the crisis in a day, everyone had to think on their feet. They had to react really, really quickly. The crisis simulation to make sure that they were coming up with the right approaches at the right time. Again, that's exactly what employers tell us that they want from graduates. They want people that can, think outside the box, come up with lots of different answers, approach things differently. They want people to come into their business potentially that will challenge them and come up with new ideas, look at their, their strategies from a different perspective. So all of these experiences give students a chance to try that out, but in a really supported environment as well.
And do students know that they are learning these things? I mean, are they able to articulate that on application forms?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and that is perhaps one of the biggest challenges actually. We have situations where a student's done a work placement, perhaps internally within the university, and somebody looks at their CV and goes, you haven't mentioned your placement, you haven't put down here what you've learnt from it, you haven't put down the skills that you've got from it. So it's really important. And again, I think the guys mentioned about reflection. Reflection's really vital in any experience like this. If you've done a placement, reflect back, what did you learn from it? Can you put that into the right sort of language to articulate that? How will you use that to sell yourself? I mean, every single one of our graduates has to learn to sell themselves so that they stand out from the crowd when they're applying for jobs. And every single little bit of that they're doing through real world learning, it counts towards it. So yes, they do have to learn how to put that into their CVs and put that into application forms. But the really good thing about experiences like this is when you're in interview situations, because when you're in an interview situation and they ask you those questions like, tell us a chance when a situation where you've been challenged, or tell us when you've had to overcome adversity. And it's these sorts of experiences when you've actually got something you can apply it to. Yeah, absolutely. So it's adding all those extra layers on that you can use just to give somebody real a sense of trust in that you've really got that experience because you've applied it. So you understand the theory, but you've applied it in a particular context and you're able to articulate that.
Yeah, rather than being hung up on I've learnt this piece of software or I can do that thing.
Yes.
Like actually I can communicate really well and here's how I can show that.
Exactly. And employers will say to you, well, give us an example of when you've used that software and what problems did you encounter with it, and did you have to do anything differently, or did it behave in a way you didn't expect it to in this particular situation? So they want you to expand on it and talk about your experiences when you're being interviewed. So it's really important that students have those real world as many as possible.
Finding ways to build in those experiences to the curriculum without it necessarily being a whole simulation day.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's one model,
really?
But it it can be anything. It could be a guest speaker coming in. It could be a live brief. It could be working on a problem in that particular class, which is something you can solve in that class, but it just happens to be one particular thing. It could be working through Solent creators on lots of different small freelance projects. It's done in many different ways throughout the university. But I think what we're really proud of is the fact that it is done in so many ways and it's valued so much. It is seen as such an important thing, and it is what differentiates our graduates. We know that employers tell us that our graduates have real commercial sense, and again that often comes from having worked in that business world, worked on projects where you're talking to people, you're understanding their language, you're seeing that it may be they've asked you, they've come in with a particular problem, but in doing that they've discussed the wider context of their business. So it just gives you that wider sense of what's going on in their world, and that means our students have those extra layers that they can fall back on.
Solent's always struck me as being quite an outward-facing university, so it's very much aware of its neighbouring businesses and partnering up with those, and that must be so beneficial to the students to be part of this kind of culture.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, as a university, we have lots of relationships with lots of different individual employers, with a lot of organisations, so groups of employers. So, for example, the Hampshire Chamber of Commerce or Creative Growth Southampton. So we're working with different groups to try and find links and opportunities for our students. But the great thing is that companies come to us because they recognise the value that they get from working with our students. It's always going to add to your business. Let's say it's a consultancy project and you've got a class of 20 minds all working on a problem that you've set them and coming up with different ideas. We've had people coming in, for example, and giving innovation challenges and different things. It could be, we've got this product, but can you think of any other uses for this product? And there you are, you've got 20 people in a class coming up and thinking of ideas of what you could do with that.
It's a fantastic resource,
isn't
it?
Yeah. We've had charities come in and say, can you help us? We want to find new ways to engage people. And again, just people coming up with ideas for you. And it's a great experience for everybody. Like everything, it has to be an exchange. So the students have to gain from it. They gain the learning, the experience. Often if it's through something like Solent Creative, they do actually gain money. But the business has to gain as well. And so in return, they are getting access to this. Absolutely. Access to the talent, access to the ideas, access to the fantastic creative minds of our students.
And have you noticed a change over the last few years? Are we doing more of this? Has it just stayed? Have we always done the same amount?
We've always done it, but we have definitely noticed that more people now come to us, which makes life a lot easier.
Yes, absolutely.
We do have a team of people who work trying to find those contacts, but we've definitely noticed that more contacts are coming into us. So they're coming to us with work placement opportunities, with internships, with live briefs. We've set up things like a charities forum where we're working constantly with charities, and we're trying to work alongside them to understand what their challenges are, so that we can then think, well, how could that be interpreted into something that could be a real world learning opportunity for our students? So we're working more synergistically with them in many ways, and that yields more benefits, I think.
You've just launched a new platform for Solent Futures. So is this pulling things together? Is this
so Solent Futures Online is basically offers students loads and loads of resources, as well as our jobs board. Very important to say that it's still a jobs board and lots of jobs and opportunities on it, work placements, campus jobs. But on top of that, there's lots of different interactive things on there, lots of video content, quizzes, things that you can do, and it's all around job searching, but also again it's that work readiness piece. So there's quite a lot on there which is about, okay, you've got this job, now what do you do with it? Yeah, exactly. And you know, how do you behave in this context? What do you do if this happens? What do you do if you have to negotiate your salary? If you feel that something's happening in the workplace that you're not happy with? So it's just got lots of supportive content for both our students and our graduates, and also for our graduates for that next step up. So they've got the first job, but how about the next job? So so it's a great platform to have, and it really helps us. We offer, as you know, careers advice for life, so students can convert to a graduate login and then carry on using that once they've left us.
That's amazing. I mean, that's creating, they were talking earlier about a community of practice, and maybe it's too disparate to be a community of practice in that sense, but it's very much got the potential to be a real community.
It has, and actually I have to say our alumni are brilliant, because they often come back to us, and one of the key things they want to do is mentoring. So they'll often act as a mentor for our current students, and they're doing that because they really want to give back. But often as part of that it becomes a real world learning opportunity, because they'll say, would you want to come in and shadow me for a day? Well, job shadowing, you know, it's a day, but it's that an opportunity for a student to go in and apply
to be in the environment,
be in that context for a day. Or they may offer them a work placement, or they'll come in and do a guest talk in that student's with that seminar group for that student. So there's lots of opportunities come out of that. So yes, we're very grateful to our alumni for the support that they give us.
That's amazing. I wasn't aware that so many
really
that's testament
positive
to their experiences themselves.
Well, I hope so. Yes, I hope it's because they do that, feel that Solent for life, you know, and you know that they're part of something special, and we want our students to feel that as well. But I think, you know, really, I think the real world learning experience is what helps you make sense of your learning. It helps you see yourself in context when you leave, because it helps you see what you're going to be doing. So it gives you that sense of a reason why you're there, and that momentum moving forward. I think it makes students work harder and perform better and get better results as a result of it.
Absolutely, and that's ultimately good for everybody, isn't it?
Of course, and then hopefully get a better job as a result of it. So it truly is a win-win situation. Truly is.
Just put in the investment here and you get this amazing outcome at the end.
Yes.
That's fantastic. That's so nice. I think that is probably a brilliant place to stop, because I know I'm conscious of time. I think we are running out of time, but thank you so much
Pleasure.
For that. So that's the live cast for this month. There won't be one in April because it's Easter, but we'll be back in May with something a little bit different and a little bit special, talking about excellence in learning and teaching, but we will be bringing in lots of our neighbours from the South Coast. So look forward to seeing you in May, and thank you to all of our guests for today.